From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. It's Wednesday, April 19th. You might not know the name Peter Bol. A few years ago, virtually nobody did. But in 2021, the Olympic runner stunned the athletics world and captured the hearts of millions by becoming the fastest Australian 800-metre runner in history.
Take the bell in the final of the men's 800 metres. Peter Bol, whose family moved from Sudan to Australia for a better life, for a new life. And he strikes out now, aiming for gold.
But that was then. Now, Bol's career hangs in the balance as he fights to clear a stain from his name. He's been accused of being a drug cheat under questionable circumstances. Today, Andrew Webster, chief sports writer for the Sydney Morning Herald, on how this scandal is impacting Peter Bol and the wider sporting community as the 29-year-old runner awaits a result from a drawn-out investigation that may or may not save his career. So, Andrew, tell me about Peter Bol. Who is he?
Peter Bol is a great Australian success story. He shot to fame at the Tokyo Olympics in 2021 when he finished fourth in the 800 metres.
Representing Australia, Peter Bol.
First Australian athlete to reach the final of the 800 metres since Ralph DeBell won gold at Mexico City in 1968. So it's a fair achievement.
Bol ran a really, really brave race, the Australian, and just ran out of steam.
But he's a great success story in the sense that he came to Australia from war-torn Sudan via Egypt. He then came with his family and settled in Perth and stumbled into running basically after showing a lot of promise as a basketballer.
I asked him to run the 800 metres then, and he said, "How many laps is that, miss?" I said, "Well, that's 2 laps around the track." And I think he beat everyone by over 100 metres. It was just beautiful to watch.
Wow, how remarkable.
He climbed through the ranks. He just had a natural ability for running. He smashed all his junior events in 400 metres and then 800 metres. He actually thinks he's probably about a 1,500 metre runner. He's a great Australian success story, but his career's been halted by a pretty damaging claim from Sports Integrity Australia about a positive drug sample.
Yeah, so on January 10th, Peter Bol hit the headlines after officers from Sports Integrity Australia, which monitors the use of prohibited substances, knocked on his door in Melbourne. What led to that?
This is a very complicated story, but athletes are drug tested all the time. In the lead up to this positive A sample that was revealed from Sports Integrity Australia investigators, he'd been drug tested in the vicinity of 26 times over the year or so leading up to that positive test. It all comes down to the substance that they allege that he was taking to enhance his performance, called EPO. Now, EPO was the drug that was best probably gained infamy when Lance Armstrong told Oprah Winfrey in that tell-all interview that was one of the main drugs that he took in a whole cocktail of drugs, Lance Armstrong, when he won all his Tour de France's, which have subsequently been stripped. It's a naturally produced hormone in the body by the kidneys, so it's not a drug test that shows you have either got it in your system or you don't. It's judged on terms of levels. It's very subjective. And his positive A sample, according to Sports Integrity Australia, was returned, and he was notified about that on January the 10th.
And then my understanding is there was a second sample, and this is where it gets complicated. Is that right? So what's happened there?
Yeah, so you have a B sample that an athlete can ask to be tested to see if there's an abnormality in the other A sample. So Peter's asked for the B sample to be tested, and it came back as atypical, which means it's neither negative nor positive. Now, the story that I broke earlier this month was about his lawyer, Paul Green, going to 2 independent and highly respected laboratories, one in Norway, one at the University of British Columbia, where their claims are that those samples were first incorrectly tested and also incorrectly read. and they are calling for the investigation into Peter Bowl to be lifted.
So how do they say that the tests were both incorrectly done and incorrectly read? What do they mean by that?
There's lots of debate about the way that EPO levels can be tested in an athlete's body. The one that WADA uses and that Sports Integrity Australia uses is called the Sarpage method, where they basically have all these bands and you apply a gel to the samples, to the urine samples or the blood sample, and then they can read whether the level indicates that there's been a use of synthetic EPO or extra EPO above what is normally produced in the body. Now, the criticism of that is that, one, the gel needs to be applied properly, and two, that the level is difficult to read and that it opens its way up to subjective interpretation that may or may not be correct.
And so I understand that Peter Bowl himself has suggested that there might be differences in people's EPO levels depending on what ethnicity they are. Is that correct?
That's open for debate. I know Peter Bowl said that in his interview with Channel 7's Spotlight a couple of months ago.
It's in our genetics, of course. We're fitter, we're faster, we're more resilient because how much we've been through and gone through. It's who we are. We can get back in shape pretty fast. It doesn't mean we're cheating. It's how we're born.
That ethnicity definitely plays a part in it. There's conflicting research on that.
Some scientists believe, and some data suggests, that ethnicity can influence an athlete's results. Where you were born and your genetic makeup may result in elevated readings that are entirely natural.
But it's unlike other drug tests. It's different where you can say that it's one thing or the other, where it's because it's naturally occurring in the body, that's where it gets quite murky.
And so what is the impact of an athlete receiving a positive or even an inconclusive result for a banned substance?
Well, straight away, it's a smear. There's no bigger smear on an athlete than saying that he or she is a drug cheat. Maybe saying that they've fixed a match, but drug cheating is a stain that's very hard to remove, and that's why he's fighting so hard to get this ongoing investigation released. For mine, the bigger picture is the fact that it's become so, the way that it's been handled, and that's what Peter Bowl and his lawyers and his management are unhappy about, because the A sample should never ever become public unless, one, the athlete says so, or two, until the B sample has been confirms the A sample. But his A sample came out just days before he was expected to be named Young Australian of the Year. There's no guarantees that he was going to be, but as Peter Bowl said to me, he was robbed of that moment, of even being there. There's certainly a belief from his people that this was leaked to mitigate any embarrassment that may be caused by the Young Australian of the Year possibly being a drug cheat.
And back to the impact on Peter Bowl himself. So how has that impacted his training or sponsorships? I understand he's attracted quite lucrative ones. I think Adidas was on board. Can you tell me about that?
Well, his two major sponsors were or have been Longines and Vroost. They've still maintained their partnership with him. I think the Adidas sponsorship has been put on hold because he can't promote it at all, because he's had to lay low pretty much since the January 10 positive notification came through. Athletes don't make a hell of a lot of money in this country, and it's only after he did what he did in Tokyo that the money started to come a little bit, but it's nothing in comparison to, major football codes or cricketers. The money just simply isn't there. So that sponsorship basically helps him get by. Now he's had to front a huge legal bill trying to clear his name. So the impasse is quite large. Now that the provisional ban has been lifted, he can go back and compete. And he makes his first appearance in Atlanta next month. But as he sort of explained to me, he could have gone to the Nationals a few weeks ago, but he thought, why would I go and compete in the Nationals when I haven't been able to properly train for them? He'd love to go there and prove a point, but he's just picking up the threads of his career basically in the next last few weeks.
And I understand the financial cost for Peter could be ruinous, potentially costing more than $250,000. But he also told you, trying to communicate to my mum what I was getting done for was the saddest moment. You can't put a price on that. So what do you know about the emotional impact of this on him?
He seems very stable to me with the whole thing. He's a really positive guy. When he finished, and that's always been the criticism of him as a runner, that he's almost not ruthless enough. I find him completely refreshing. Like, he came second in the 800 metres at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham last year, and afterwards he was like, oh, well, he's the guy who's beaten me. He's done, good on him. He's just better than me on the day. There was no kicking stones. There was no blaming anyone else. He's a really chirpy and happy guy. And even when I saw him in Melbourne, when I did out my piece with him a few weeks ago, I have to say I was so surprised about how optimistic he was about it. And also just the fact that he's not looking so much for compensation or to call anyone out with this. He just wants his name cleared. He just wants proper process to be adhered to so he can get on with what he does best, and that's running. And there's been a few developments in the last couple of days with Sports Integrity Australia and their correspondence with him that suggests that they're not going to let go of this in a hurry.
So tell us about that. I mean, how long do you think this could drag out?
So they told him that, and they sent a letter, a legal letter, in late March, and that was the letter that I published in the Herald and the Age, explaining from his lawyers to Sports Integrity Australia the evidence that they've got from two independent labs and their concerns about the way that the testing regime was done and their concerns about the way the testing was read. It took them until last week to say that they were going to get in contact with Peter Bowl and respond to that letter, a long time after the 7 days of notice that his lawyer had told him. And now they've told him that they're getting external legal advice and may get back to him this week. So it's just that uncertainty over his head that he finds troubling, and he wants a resolution to.
And you've recently said that there should be a Senate inquiry into this investigation. Why?
Because the lab that did the initial testing and Sports Integrity Australia are both government-funded agencies. And it gets quite frustrating around these things, and I've covered a lot of drug stuff in sport over the last 20-odd years. And Sports Integrity Australia, before that it was called the ASADA, were very reluctant to give anything publicly. And they say, we're a government agency, we've got to do everything by the book, we can't say anything publicly. But I think there needs to be some level of transparency with their actions, and hiding behind the fact that, no, we can't say anything, we're a government agency, I just don't think is good enough, to be perfectly honest.
Right.
The fact that an A sample has been leaked in the way that it has been, but we should both say that both Athletics Australia and Sports Integrity have denied that they're the leaks. But the fact that it was leaked, his A sample, and there's doubts about whether the A sample is even correct, to me, that suggests that someone's got to be accountable for it. There needs to be some level of inquiry into how the hell that can happen to an athlete and how it's not going to happen again.
So as you mentioned, Peter's got an upcoming race in the United States. I believe it's on May 6th. So what impact is all of this having on his ability to train or focus on that race?
He's back training now. He's allowed to compete and train again. And I think he's just very keen to get this part of the investigation over and done with Sports Integrity Australia, and then start rebuilding his career and with the ultimate goal, obviously, of Paris next year. But I have to say, most of the public support seems to be with Peter with this one. Nevertheless, when you say someone's a drug cheat, that stain is very hard to remove, as I said earlier. So it doesn't matter. The longer that it goes on and the longer that Sports Integrity don't justify why he was banned in the first place, the longer that's going to go.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on and explaining this all to us. I know we'll be looking forward to your next report.
Thanks for having me.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Hannah Mills-Turbot, with technical assistance from David McMillan. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Samantha Selinger Morris. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.